The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1882, informing Xavier Quinlan that his uncle had died and left him everything, including a sprawling cattle ranch in Wyoming territory and an obligation he never saw coming. Xavier stood on the platform at the train station in Cheyenne, holding the second letter his uncle's lawyer had sent, this one explaining the unusual condition attached to his inheritance. The wind kicked up dust around his boots as he read the words again, certain he had misunderstood. His uncle Thomas had promised Xavier's hand in marriage to a woman named Grace Reynolds who lived on the ranch, worked it alongside Thomas for the past 3 years, and apparently expected to become Xavier's wife, as part of some arrangement the old man had made before his death. The whole situation felt like something out of a dime novel, not real life. Xavier had spent the last 6 years working as a surveyor for the railroad, moving from town to town, sleeping in boarding houses and saving every penny. He had dreamed of owning land someday, but not like this. Never like this. He hired a horse from the livery and rode north toward Hot Springs, a small settlement nestled near the Big Horn Mountains where his uncle's ranch supposedly sat on some of the best grazing land in the territory. The September air carried the first hints of autumn, and the endless Wyoming sky stretched above him in shades of blue he had never seen back east. His parents had died of fever when he was 12, and Uncle Thomas had paid for his schooling before heading west himself 15 years ago. They had exchanged letters occasionally, but Xavier had never visited, never imagined he would inherit anything, let alone a ranch and a fiancée. The lawyer's letter had been specific. Thomas Reynolds, Grace's father, had owned the neighboring property. When he died 2 years ago, he left debts that would have forced Grace off her family's land. Thomas Quinlan had paid those debts and merged the properties, but only after making an arrangement with Grace. She could stay, help run the combined ranch, and when Thomas died, she would marry his nephew Xavier and they would run the spread together. Grace had agreed, apparently seeing it as the only way to preserve her father's legacy and maintain the life she had always known. Xavier had no idea what kind of woman would agree to such a bargain. He imagined someone desperate, perhaps plain and worn down by hard living, maybe older and resigned to a loveless marriage for the sake of security. The thought made his stomach turn. He did not want a wife who saw him as merely a means to an end, and he certainly did not want to force himself on a woman who had no real choice in the matter. The landscape shifted as he rode, rolling grassland giving way to rougher terrain, dotted with cottonwood trees along creek beds. He passed several smaller ranches, their fences well maintained, cattle grazing peacefully in the late afternoon sun. Hot Springs itself was barely a town, just a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses built around natural hot springs that gave the place its name. The ranch lay another 5 miles beyond, nestled in a valley with the mountains rising behind it. When Xavier finally saw the ranch house, his breath caught. It was larger than he expected, a solid 2-story structure built from local timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, all in good repair. Horses grazed in a nearby corral, and he could see cattle scattered across the valley, hundreds of them. This was not some struggling homestead. This was a successful operation, worth real money. He dismounted near the main house, tying his horse to the rail, and stood there for a moment gathering his courage. Before he could knock, the door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. Xavier had been wrong about everything. Grace Reynolds was perhaps 23 or 24, with thick auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of spring grass. She wore men's work clothes, denim pants and a cotton shirt, but there was nothing masculine about her. She was beautiful in a way that seemed entirely unconscious, her face sun-kissed and dusted with freckles, her expression guarded but intelligent. "You must be Xavier Quinlan," she said, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. "Yes, madam, and you are Grace Reynolds." "I am." She did not move from the porch, did not invite him inside. I suppose the lawyer explained everything. He did. Xavier removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Though I am not sure I understand it. It is simple enough. Your uncle saved my land. In exchange, I agreed to marry his heir and continue running this ranch. I keep my father's dream alive. You get a profitable spread and someone who knows how to manage it, and everyone benefits." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business transaction, which Xavier supposed it was. "And what if I do not wish to marry a stranger?" He asked the question gently, watching her face. Something flickered in her eyes, hurt perhaps, though she masked it quickly. "Then you own the ranch outright anyway, and I will pack my things and leave." The lawyer was clear. "The land is yours regardless. The marriage was your uncle's hope, not a legal requirement." "Where would you go?" She lifted her chin. "I would figure something out. I always do." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind rustling through the nearby trees. Xavier studied her, seeing pride in every line of her body and something else too. Loneliness maybe. Fear, carefully hidden but present nonetheless. "May I come inside?" he asked. "Perhaps we could talk about this properly." Grace hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. The interior of the house surprised him again. It was clean and well organized, with furniture that showed care and craftsmanship. Books lined shelves in the main room, and he noticed several clearly well-rated. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the kitchen beyond looked efficient and well-stocked. "I have kept everything running just as your uncle did," Grace said, moving to the stove where coffee sat warming. She poured 2 cups without asking, handing him one. "We have 8 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Good men, all of them. Loyal. The fall roundup starts next week. We have got about 1,500 head spread across the valley and up into the lower mountains. The books are all current if you want to review them." "You manage the books yourself." "My father taught me to read and cipher. Your uncle appreciated having someone who could track expenses and profits." There was pride in her voice now. Xavier sipped the coffee, buying himself time to think. "Miss Reynolds, I need you to understand something. I did not come here expecting to force any woman into marriage. Whatever arrangement my uncle made, it is not binding as far as I am concerned. You are free to make your own choice. My choice was made 3 years ago when I agreed to your uncle's terms." Her jaw set stubbornly. "Circumstances have changed. I am not my uncle. You do not know me, and I certainly do not know you. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, regardless of property or agreements made by people now dead." Grace set her cup down with enough force that coffee sloshed onto the table. "Do you think I have not considered that? Do you think I want to marry a complete stranger? But what exactly are my options, Mr. Quinlan? I have no family left, no money of my own. I am 24 years old, well past the age when most women marry, and I have spent the last 3 years doing men's work on this ranch. What respectable man would want me now? Where would I go? What would I do?" The raw honesty in her words struck him. "You could stay here," he said slowly. "Work for wages like the other hands. Keep managing the books if you are willing. I know nothing about running a ranch. I would need help. As your employee," her voice was flat. "As my partner, perhaps. We could draw up papers, make it legal. You would have a stake in the profit's security. And when you eventually marry someone else, some proper lady who does not wear pants and smell like horses, what happens to me then?" Grace shook her head. Your uncle's arrangement was not romantic, Mr. Quinlan, but it was honest. It gave me a place, a future. What you are offering is temporary charity. Xavier felt frustration rising. I am trying to give you a choice. No, you are trying to ease your own conscience. Grace stood, pacing to the window. You think I have not had time to consider every angle of this. I knew your uncle was sick. I knew he was writing to you, making arrangements. I have had months to decide if I could go through with this, and I decided I could. Not because I am desperate, though God knows I have little enough prospects, but because this land matters to me. My father built something here and your uncle expanded it. I have put 3 years of sweat and blood into making this ranch thrive. I am not ready to walk away from that. Then do not walk away. Stay and work with me. Let us figure this out without rushing into marriage. She turned to face him, and he saw tears threatening in her eyes, though she blinked them back. And what happens in 6 months when you realize you want a real wife? Or when the other ranchers refuse to do business with you because you have got an unmarried woman living in your house? Or when you decide I am not worth the trouble and tell me to leave? At least marriage gives me legal protection, Mr. Quinlan. At least then I have rights. Xavier had not considered those angles. He was beginning to realize how naive he had been, thinking he could just offer her a job and everything would be fine. The social realities of the territory, the legal vulnerabilities she faced as a woman alone, these were not things he had fully understood. You are right, he said quietly. I apologize, I did not think it through. Some of the tension left her shoulders. I appreciate that you are trying to be honorable, truly I do, but sometimes the honorable thing and the practical thing are not the same. So what do you suggest? Grace returned to the table, sitting across from him. I suggest we take a few weeks to get to know each other. You learn the ranch, meet the hands, see if this is even a life you want. I will teach you what I can. If at the end of that time you still want to honor your uncle's arrangement, we will marry. If not, I will leave and you can hire someone else to help you run the place. And if you decide you cannot stand me, Xavier asked, a hint of humor in his voice. The smallest smile touched her lips. Then I suppose we will both be in a difficult position. They agreed to her terms, and Grace showed him to one of the upstairs bedrooms, freshly cleaned and waiting. His uncle's room stood across the hall, and she explained she had moved her own things to a smaller room downstairs after Thomas died, wanting to give Xavier privacy and space. That first night, Xavier lay awake on a real bed for the first time in months, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had gotten himself into. He could still leave, sell the ranch, take the money and go back to his old life. But even as he thought it, he knew he would not. Something about this place, about Grace herself, had already begun to hook into him. Over the next few days, Grace proved to be an exceptional teacher. She woke him before dawn and brought him out to meet the ranch hands, a mixture of weathered cowboys and younger men learning the trade. They regarded Xavier with cautious respect, clearly reserving judgment until they saw what kind of boss he would be. The foreman, a grizzled man named Cal Benson who had worked for Thomas for a decade, took Xavier under his wing and explained the operations. They had spring calves that needed branding, fences that required mending before winter, and the upcoming roundup that would determine how many head they could afford to keep through the cold months and how many they would drive to market. Grace rode with them most days, and Xavier quickly learned she was as skilled a rider as any of the men, maybe better. She could rope a steer, doctor a sick calf, and spot problems with fencing or water sources that he would have missed entirely. The hands respected her, he realized. They might tease her occasionally, but they listened when she spoke and followed her lead without question. How did you learn all this? Xavier asked one evening as they rode back to the house, both exhausted from a long day checking the southern pastures. "My mother died when I was 8, Grace said, her eyes on the horizon where the sun was setting in brilliant oranges and golds. My father had no other children, no sons to teach, so he taught me instead. Some people thought it was scandalous, raising a daughter to do men's work. But he said skills mattered more than propriety, and he was right. When he died, I knew how to keep the ranch running. It was the debts that almost destroyed me, not lack of knowledge. What happened, if you do not mind me asking?" She was quiet for a moment. "He trusted the wrong person. A man who claimed to be a friend, who convinced him to invest in a mining venture that turned out to be nothing but lies. By the time we realized we had been swindled, the money was gone and the debts were crushing us. Your uncle heard about our situation and made his offer. My father agreed to it before he died, made me promise I would go through with it. So you are honoring your father's wishes as much as the practical arrangement." "I suppose I am." She glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Does that seem foolish?" "No, it seems like love." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, and Xavier found himself watching her more than the landscape. The way she sat her horse with easy confidence, the way the evening light caught in her auburn hair, the small gestures he was beginning to recognize. When she was thinking hard about something, she chewed her bottom lip. When she was pleased, her eyes crinkled at the corners just before she smiled. When she was frustrated, she had a habit of pushing stray hair behind her ear, even when there was no hair to push. He was starting to understand why his uncle had made this arrangement. Grace was remarkable, and any man would be lucky to call her his wife, but Xavier wanted more than an arrangement based on property and obligation. He wanted what his parents had before the fever took them. He wanted partnership and affection, laughter and genuine caring. Could he build that with Grace, given time? He was beginning to think he could if she was willing. The roundup began the following Monday, and Xavier got his first real taste of cowboy work. They rose before dawn and spent 14-hour days in the saddle, gathering cattle from across the vast property, cutting out the calves that needed branding, identifying which steers were ready for market. It was brutal, exhausting work that left Xavier's muscles screaming and his backside raw from hours on horseback. Grace rode beside him through all of it, never complaining, never faltering. She worked as hard as any of the men, harder than some, and by the end of each day she still had energy to help cook meals for the crew and check on the horses. Xavier found himself in awe of her stamina and dedication. On the third night of the roundup, they were sitting around the campfire with the hands, eating beef stew and cornbread. One of the younger cowboys, a kid named Pete who could not be more than 19, pulled out a harmonica and started playing. Someone else began singing, a mournful ballad about lost love, and the lonely prairie. Grace sat across the fire from Xavier, her face lit by the dancing flames, and when their eyes met she smiled at him. It was not the guarded, cautious expression she usually wore. This was genuine and warm, and it hit Xavier like a physical blow to the chest. In that moment, dusty and exhausted, surrounded by cowboys and cattle, he realized he was falling for her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt right, like something inevitable he had been moving toward since the moment he stepped off the train in Cheyenne. After the song ended and the men began drifting toward their bedrolls, Xavier walked Grace back toward the chuck wagon where she had laid out her own sleeping area, respectfully separate from the men. "You are getting better in the saddle," she said, a teasing note in her voice. "Only fell off twice today." "That steer came out of nowhere," Xavier protested, but he was grinning. "They tend to do that." She stopped walking, turning to face him, The firelight still reached them here, casting long shadows. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone softer, I suppose. A city man who would take one look at all this and run back east. But you are trying. Really trying. I appreciate that." "I am beginning to love it here," Xavier admitted. "The work is hard, but it is honest. And the land, Grace. I have never seen anything like this. I understand why you fight so hard to keep it." She looked up at him, and he was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to close the distance between them. But he did not move. Not yet. He had told her she had a choice, and he meant it. "Ask me something," Grace said suddenly. "Something you want to know," Xavier thought for a moment. "What do you dream about? Beyond the ranch, beyond survival. If you could have anything, what would it be?" The question seemed to surprise her. "No one has ever asked me that before." "I am asking now." She walked a few steps away, looking up at the stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. "I dream about family," she said finally. "About having children who grow up loving this land the way I do. About teaching them to ride and work cattle, but also to read and think and question. About having someone to share the burden with and the joy. I dream about not being alone anymore." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Xavier felt something break open in his chest. He moved to her side, not touching but present. "You do not have to be alone. Do not make promises you cannot keep, Xavier. I mean it. These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, watching you work, I have been thinking." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My uncle's arrangement was not romantic. You are right about that. But maybe it does not have to stay that way. Maybe two people can start from practical reasons and build something real." Grace turned to look at him, vulnerability naked on her face. "And maybe they cannot. Maybe we will marry and spend the rest of our lives as strangers sharing a house. Or maybe we will not." Xavier reached out, gently taking her hand. She did not pull away. "I am not saying I have all the answers, Grace, but I am saying I would like to try. Not because of the ranch or the arrangement or any of that. Because I like you. I like who you are, how you think, the way you care about things. I like the sound of your laugh, which I have only heard twice, but I want to hear it again. I like how you never back down from a challenge, and how you treat the hands with respect, and how you remember every single cow like they are pets. We have 1,500 cattle. They are not pets. That old brown one with the crooked horn, you call her Gertrude." Grace laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. "She is sweet for a cow, see? I want to know all of it. The names you have given the cows, what books you read, what you think about when you are riding alone. I want to know you, Grace, not just work alongside you." She squeezed his hand, and he felt hope surge through him. "I want that too," she whispered. "I am just scared. So am I, but maybe we can be scared together." They stood there under the stars, hands linked, and something shifted between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. The recognition that they could build something real if they were both brave enough to try. The roundup finished successfully, and they drove 300 head to market in Cheyenne, getting good prices that would see the ranch through winter with money to spare. Xavier handled the negotiations while Grace managed the cattle, and afterward the buyer commented that they made a good team. The word stayed with Xavier on the long ride back to Hot Springs. He had been at the ranch for nearly a month now, and the 2 weeks Grace had suggested for getting to know each other had passed. Neither of them had mentioned it, but Xavier could feel the unspoken question hanging between them. What happened next? The night after they returned from Cheyenne, Xavier asked Grace to have dinner with him, just the two of them in the main house. She agreed, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. She wore a dress for the first time since he had arrived, a simple green cotton that matched her eyes, and had left her hair down so it fell in waves past her shoulders. Xavier had bought supplies in town, and he cooked her dinner himself, a skill learned from years of bachelor living. It was nothing fancy, just steak and potatoes and green beans, but he set the table with the good china he had found in the cabinet and lit candles. "This is lovely," Grace said, looking around at his preparations with genuine pleasure. "You deserve lovely things," Xavier replied, pulling out her chair. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily now that they had spent so much time together. Grace told him about her childhood, about her mother who had loved poetry and her father who had dreamed of building an empire on the Wyoming plains. Xavier shared his own stories, about losing his parents, about the lonely years that followed, about working on the railroad and seeing the country but never feeling like he belonged anywhere. "And now," Grace asked, "do you feel like you belong here?" "I am starting to," Xavier said honestly. "More than I expected. This place, this life, it suits me in ways I did not anticipate. And you, Grace, you make it feel like home." She blushed, looking down at her plate. "You make it feel different too. Good different. Your uncle was kind to me, but he was an old man, and I was his employee more than anything. With you, I feel like we are building something together. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." After dinner, they moved to the front porch where they could watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Xavier had been thinking about this moment all day, rehearsing what he wanted to say. Now that it was here, his carefully planned words fled. "Grace, I know we agreed to take a few weeks to decide about the arrangement. That time has passed, and I need you to know where I stand." She turned to him, her expression open but guarded. "Go on. I want to marry you. Not because of the ranch or my uncle's wishes, but because I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment you stepped onto that porch and looked at me like you could see right through any nonsense I might try. You are strong and smart and beautiful, and I cannot imagine my life here without you in it." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. "This was my mother's ring, the only thing I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small emerald stone. Grace gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Xavier, I do not know what to say. Say yes, or say no, but please say what you truly feel, not what you think you should feel or what is practical." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I am falling in love with you too. I did not want to. I tried not to. I told myself it was just the situation, that any kindness would feel like more than it was because I was lonely. But it is not that. It is you. The way you listen when I talk, the way you treat the hands with respect even when you are learning, the way you look at this land like it is precious, the way you look at me like I am precious. Yes, Xavier. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, finally closing the distance he had been carefully maintaining for weeks. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, and Xavier felt like every hard thing in his life had led him exactly here, to this woman, to this moment. They planned the wedding for October, giving themselves time to prepare and to let the hands finish the last of the autumn work. Grace wanted to be married in the small church in Hot Springs, and Xavier agreed, though he would have married her anywhere she wanted. The women from the nearby ranches rallied around Grace, helping her alter a dress that had belonged to her mother and planning a small reception at the church hall. Xavier watched with amusement as his fiancée, who could outwork most men and showed no patience for nonsense, got flustered over details like flowers and cake. "I have never done this before," she confessed one evening, looking overwhelmed by fabric samples. "Mother was married in this dress, and I want to honor her, but I also want it to fit properly and look nice. You could wear a feed sack and look beautiful, Xavier said, earning himself a swat with the fabric samples. "That is not helpful." He pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You are right. I am sorry. How can I actually help? Just tell me it will be fine, that I am not making a fool of myself caring about these things. Grace, you are allowed to care about your wedding day. You are allowed to want it to be special. That does not make you foolish, it makes you human." He kissed her forehead. "And it will be perfect because we will be there together." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, typical for late October in Wyoming. The cottonwoods had turned gold, and the mountains wore their first dusting of snow. Xavier dressed in the only suit he owned, bought years ago for his uncle's funeral, ironically, and tried to calm his nerves. Cal found him pacing in the church vestibule an hour before the ceremony. "You are going to wear a hole in the floor, boss. What if I mess this up? What if I am not the husband she deserves?" the old foreman laughed. "Son, if you are worried about that, you are already better than most men. Grace is a smart woman. She would not be marrying you if she did not think you were worth it." "I love her," Xavier said, the words still feeling new and precious on his tongue. "More than I thought possible." "I know you do. Everyone can see it, the way you look at her like she hung the moon. That is real, and that is what matters." The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Grace walked down the aisle alone, having no family left to give her away, but she held her head high and her eyes never left Xavier's face. She was stunning in her mother's altered dress, her hair adorned with small white flowers, her smile radiant. They spoke their vows in front of the gathered community, ranchers and cowboys, and the few townsfolk who had befriended them. Xavier promised to love and cherish her, to stand by her side through whatever came, to honor her strength and support her dreams. Grace promised the same, her voice steady and sure, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with all the love bursting in his heart. The reception was loud and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible for such a small community to produce. Grace laughed more than Xavier had ever heard, spinning in his arms as they danced, her happiness infectious. As the sun set and guests began to drift home, Xavier and Grace rode back to the ranch together, finally alone. They had decided to make the main house truly theirs, and the hands had surprised them by decorating the bedroom while they were at the church, hanging garlands and leaving wildflowers in vases. That night, Xavier made love to his wife slowly and tenderly, learning her body the way he had learned the ranch, with patience and attention and wonder. Grace was shy at first but grew bolder, and they discovered each other with a joy that felt sacred. Afterward, lying tangled together in the lamplight, Grace traced patterns on Xavier's chest with her finger. "I did not think I could be this happy," she murmured. "I thought the best I could hope for was security and maybe respect. But this, Xavier, this is so much more." "This is just the beginning," he promised, kissing her temple. "We are going to build something amazing together, not just the ranch, but a life, a real life. Tell me what you see when you imagine our future." Xavier thought for a moment, playing with her hair. "I see this house full of children. I see us teaching them to ride and raid and be good people. I see us growing old together, still working this land, still learning about each other. I see hard times because life always brings those, but facing them together and coming through stronger. I see love, Grace, every day growing deeper." She kissed him then, slow and sweet. "I see that too, all of it." The first year of their marriage brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. A harsh winter tested their preparedness, but Grace's meticulous planning saw them through with only minimal losses. Spring brought new calves and the exhausting work of branding and vaccinating. Summer meant long days of haying and fence repair, preparing for the next winter's cycle. Through it all, Xavier and Grace worked side by side, their partnership deepening into something unshakable. They learned each other's rhythms, when to push and when to step back, when to offer help and when to let the other prove their capability. The hands noticed and approved, commenting that the ranch ran smoother than ever with the two of them in charge. In the evenings, they developed their own rituals. Grace would read aloud while Xavier worked on tack that needed mending, her voice bringing characters and stories to life. They would sit on the porch and watch the stars, talking about everything and nothing. They made love with increasing passion and comfort, learning what pleased each other, sometimes laughing at their own awkwardness, always ending wrapped in each other's arms. 14 months after their wedding, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, nervous despite their frequent discussions about wanting children. "You are sure?" Xavier asked, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "As sure as I can be. The signs are all there and I am never late." She searched his face. "Are you happy?" "Happy," Xavier laughed, the sound bordering on giddy. "Grace, I am overjoyed. We are going to be parents. You are going to be a mother. This is everything I dreamed about." She relaxed into his embrace. "I am scared," she admitted. "My mother died young. What if something happens to me? What if I am not a good mother? You are going to be an amazing mother. And nothing is going to happen to you. We will get the best doctor and I will be right there with you every step of the way." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered terrible morning sickness for the first few months and had to reduce her workload, something that frustrated her to no end. Xavier took on more of her responsibilities, grateful for the training she had given him, and hired an additional hand to help with the extra work. As her belly grew, Xavier found himself falling in love with her all over again. She was beautiful pregnant, her skin glowing with health despite her exhaustion, her hand constantly resting protectively on their growing child. He caught her sometimes, staring out the window with a soft expression, clearly lost in thoughts of the baby. They prepared a nursery in one of the upstairs rooms, painting it a cheerful yellow and building a cradle from cottonwood that grew on their land. Grace sewed tiny clothes, her stitches careful and precise, while Xavier carved wooden toys, determined their child would have everything they needed. On a warm day in May 1884, Grace went into labor. Xavier sent one of the hands racing for the doctor in hot springs while he stayed with Grace, holding her hand and trying not to panic as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. The doctor arrived with a nurse, an older woman named Martha who had delivered half the babies in the territory. She shooed Xavier out of the room despite Grace's protests, telling him this was woman's work and he would just be in the way. Xavier paced the hallway for hours, listening to Grace's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Cal sat with him, offering whiskey that Xavier refused, needing to be clear-headed in case Grace needed him. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. Martha opened the door, her face creased in a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Quinlan, a big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully." Xavier rushed into the room to find Grace propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she had stitched herself. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," she whispered. "Xavier, look at him." Xavier approached on shaky legs and peered down at the baby. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. When Xavier touched one of those fists, the baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and Xavier felt his whole world shift. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed. "You are perfect. Grace, I love you so much. I love you too." She shifted the baby so Xavier could sit beside them on the bed. What should we name him? They had discussed names endlessly but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Xavier knew. Thomas, he said. After my uncle, he brought us together. It seems right to honor him. Grace smiled. Thomas Quinlan, I like it. She looked down at their son. Welcome to the world, Tommy. We have been waiting for you. Parenthood transformed their lives in ways both expected and surprising. Tommy was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he demanded constant attention. Grace took to motherhood with the same intensity she brought to everything, nursing him and doting on him while still trying to maintain her role on the ranch. Xavier tried to help as much as he could, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, changing diapers and marveling at every tiny development. Watching Grace with their son, seeing the fierce love in her eyes, made him fall even deeper in love with her. I never imagined I could feel like this, Grace confessed one night as they sat together in the nursery, both watching Tommy sleep in his cradle. Like my heart exists outside my body now. I know exactly what you mean, Xavier said, his arm around her shoulders. He is the best of both of us. Your stubbornness and my charm. Grace elbowed him gently. Your stubbornness too, I think. He gets that from both sides. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Xavier and Grace had found their rhythm, dividing responsibilities in a way that played to both their strengths. Grace managed the books and the breeding program, tracking bloodlines and making decisions about which bulls to keep and which cows to cull. Xavier handled the day-to-day operations with the hands, overseeing fence repairs, water management, and the seasonal cattle drives. They added to the herd each year, buying more land when a neighboring rancher decided to sell and move back east. By 1887, they were running over 2,000 head, and the Quinlan Ranch had a reputation as one of the best operations in the territory. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. By age 3, he was riding in front of Xavier on a gentle mare, squealing with delight as they checked on the cattle. Grace worried about him getting hurt, but Xavier reminded her that they had both grown up doing the same kind of work, and Tommy needed to learn. In the spring of 1888, Grace told Xavier she was pregnant again. They were both thrilled, though Grace worried about managing 2 children and the ranch. Xavier hired additional help and insisted she take things easier this time, having learned from her first pregnancy how stubborn she could be about maintaining her workload. Their daughter arrived in December, a winter baby with Grace's auburn hair and Xavier's dark eyes. They named her Sarah, after Grace's mother, and Tommy was instantly smitten with his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. With 2 children, the house felt full and alive in ways Xavier had never imagined during those first lonely days after inheriting the ranch. Laughter filled the rooms, along with the chaos of toys and diapers and the constant needs of young children. It was exhausting and wonderful, and Xavier treasured every moment. Grace bloomed as a mother, her earlier fears proving unfounded. She was patient but firm, loving but not indulgent, raising their children to be respectful and hardworking. She taught them letters and numbers as soon as they were old enough, determined they would have the education she had received. The years flowed by in the rhythm of ranch life. Spring brandings, summer hay cuttings, fall roundups, winter preparations. Tommy grew tall and capable, learning to rope and ride and work cattle. Sarah proved to have her mother's head for figures and by age 6 was helping Grace with the books, adding columns of numbers with careful precision. In 1892, Wyoming achieved statehood, and the territorial days were officially over. Xavier and Grace attended the celebrations in Hot Springs, proud to be part of this new chapter in the region's history. Their ranch was now in the state of Wyoming, part of a growing nation, and they felt the weight and promise of that transition. "We are building something that will last," Grace said as they watched fireworks light up the night sky. "Not just the ranch, but a legacy. Our children and our children's children will work this land." Xavier pulled her close, their teenagers standing nearby with friends, baby Sarah on his hip. "We are building it together. That is what makes it special. None of this would mean anything without you." She turned to kiss him, long and sweet despite their audience. After 10 years of marriage, the passion between them had not faded, but had deepened into something richer. They knew each other completely now, had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had built a life from an arrangement neither had truly wanted but both now treasured. "I love you," Grace whispered against his lips. "More than I thought possible that first day when you stood on the porch looking so uncertain." "I love you too. You were so fierce, all dressed in pants and ready to defend your home. I did not stand a chance." They laughed together, holding each other as the fireworks continued, their family around them, their future bright. More children followed. In 1894, twin boys arrived, rambunctious and loud and keeping everyone on their toes. Grace joked that they should have stopped at 2, but Xavier could see how much she loved having a full house, how she thrived on the organized chaos of a large family. Tommy at 12 was old enough to be a real help on the ranch, riding with the hands and learning the business from every angle. Xavier taught him everything he knew, while Grace made sure he kept up with his studies. They both wanted their children to have choices, to be educated enough to succeed whether they stayed on the ranch or pursued other dreams. Sarah at 10 was already showing signs of her mother's business acumen, suggesting improvements to the breeding program and asking detailed questions about markets and pricing. Xavier suspected she would be running the operation someday, and the thought filled him with pride. The twins, Michael and Matthew, were only toddlers but already obsessed with horses and cattle, toddling after their older siblings and getting into everything. In 1896, Grace told Xavier they were expecting again, and he could see she was both happy and exhausted at the prospect. At 38, this pregnancy was harder on her than the previous ones. Xavier insisted she rest more, taking on even more of her responsibilities despite her protests. Their final child, a daughter they named Grace after her mother but called Gracie to avoid confusion, arrived in early 1897. She was a tiny thing, smaller than the others had been, but perfectly healthy and with a will of iron from the start. "We are done," Grace announced firmly as she nursed baby Gracie. "6 children is more than enough, Xavier Quinlan," he laughed, kissing her sweaty forehead. "I agree completely. Our house is full to bursting, and I am not sure I can survive any more sleepless nights." "You are not the one who has to carry them and birth them," Grace pointed out, but she was smiling. "True, you are the hero here. I am just the supporting player. A very important supporting player." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining in the familiar way of long marriage. "I could not have done any of this without you. You know that, right? You saved me, Xavier, not just from losing the ranch, but from a life alone. You gave me everything I dreamed of and more." "You saved me too," Xavier said honestly. "I was drifting before I came here, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You and this place, this life we built, you made me whole." They sat together in the quiet nursery, baby Gracie sleeping peacefully, and felt the weight of their blessings. It had not always been easy. There had been harsh winters that killed cattle, dry summers that stressed the water supplies, hands who left unexpectedly, and sick children who scared them half to death. But they had faced it all together, and their love had only grown stronger. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their growing children. Tommy at 18 decided to stay on the ranch, becoming a full partner in the operation and bringing fresh ideas that helped them expand further. He married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet young woman named Ellen who fit into their family seamlessly, and built a house on the far end of the property. Sarah at 16 was courted by a banker's son from Cheyenne, a young man smart enough to appreciate her intelligence. Xavier watched his daughter carefully, making sure this boy treated her with the respect she deserved. When they married 2 years later, Sarah made it clear she wanted to keep managing the ranch books, and her new husband supported her work, understanding that her connection to the land ran deep. The younger children were still at home, the twins now rowdy 12-year-olds and Gracie a precocious 8-year-old who followed her father everywhere. Xavier was 42 now, his dark hair showing threads of silver, his body showing the wear of years of physical labor. Grace at 40 had laugh lines around her eyes and her auburn hair was fading to a softer shade streaked with gray. To Xavier, she was more beautiful than ever, her beauty now paired with a depth and wisdom that came from living fully. They stood together on the porch one evening in the summer of 1900, watching the sunset paint the mountains just as they had on so many evenings before. The house behind them rang with the voices of their younger children arguing over a game, and somewhere in the distance they could hear Tommy calling instructions to the hands. 18 years, Grace said, leaning against Xavier's solid warmth. 18 years since you showed up on this porch looking terrified. I was terrified, Xavier admitted. Everything in my life was changing so fast, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. The best thing that ever happened to us, Grace corrected. We made this together, Xavier. Every bit of it. He turned to pull her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and passion he had felt that first time and every time since. Here is to the next 18 years, he murmured against her lips, and all the years after that. All the years, Grace agreed, kissing him back. Their story had started with an obligation, an arrangement made by a dying man trying to take care of two people he loved. But what Xavier and Grace had built together was so much more than that. It was a love that had grown from uncertain beginnings into something unshakable, a partnership that had created not just a successful ranch, but a family, a legacy, a life filled with purpose and joy. As the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Xavier and Grace stood together, hands linked as they had been so many times before, ready to face whatever came next. Together they had turned a promise into a miracle, an arrangement into a love story that would echo through the generations that followed. The ranch would endure, the land would remain, but most importantly, the love they had discovered in each other would be the foundation on which their children and grandchildren would build their own dreams. And as Grace often said in the years that followed, when their grandchildren asked how she and Xavier had met, sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. What started as duty had become devotion. What began as an arrangement had become the greatest love either of them had ever known. The ranch that brought them together had given them everything, but it was their choice to love each other, to build a life together, to honor the gift they had been given, that transformed it all into something magical. They had started as strangers bound by obligation. They had become partners, then friends, then lovers, then parents, and through it all they had become the truest versions of themselves. In each other they had found home. And that home, built on love and land and the courage to take a chance on each other, would stand for generations. a testament to what two people could create when they chose to build together rather than walk away. The Quinlan Ranch became legendary in Wyoming, known not just for its quality cattle but for the love story at its heart, the story of a man who inherited a ranch and found his destiny, and a woman who agreed to an arrangement and discovered her soulmate. Years later, when Tommy and Ellen had children of their own, when Sarah's sons came to visit from Cheyenne, when the twins brought their families to the ranch for holidays, and when Gracie married a cowboy and built her own house on the property, Xavier and Grace would sit on that same porch and marvel at what they had created. All of it traced back to that September day in 1882 when a telegram arrived and changed everything. "No regrets?" Xavier would ask, as he often did. "Not a single one," Grace would answer, as she always did. And in the twilight of the Wyoming evening, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had built, they would kiss again, still in love, still grateful, still together. The promise that brought them together had been kept in ways neither could have imagined, and the life they built together stood as proof that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start not with passion, but with a choice, a commitment, and the courage to let that choice grow into something beautiful. The end.